Happy Devils Wednesday. This is the State of the Fan Address, episode 302, titled Stanley Cup Rematch. Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about that. We're going to be talking about taxes as well. Yes, taxes. Streaming live on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, X Live, and Twitch on the Let's Go Devils Network. I'm your host, Sam Wu, here with Pucks and Pitchforks blog editor-in-chief Nick Villano as the Stanley Cup Finals begins tonight. And, you know, some of us has boycotted this final because it's the same teams from last season. The chosen one, the Edmonton Oilers, with all the first overall picks on their roster, or very high first-round picks of years ago, playing the Florida Panthers, who will try to bully their way to a back-to-back Stanley Cup. The third appearance in the Stanley Cup Finals, which is very impressive, Nick. Very impressive. 3 appearances in a row.
I do want to put a little asterisk on that, though.
How?
We forget that 2 years ago, because here's the thing, is that the last 2 years the Florida Panthers have been a wagon. Best team in the league. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from them. Right before this, first of all, Tampa did the same thing. 3 Stanley Cup final in a row. They're built very differently. Not very differently, but differently, right? They're not the same team. Yet both of them have come in and dominated the Eastern Conference. I have 2 reasons why. But I just want to put the asterisk out that the only reason the Panthers made the playoffs in 2023, before that magical run of the Stanley Cup, is because the Penguins lost to the lowly Blackhawks in the last game of the season.
That doesn't matter. That does not matter.
I think it matters. A little. Not a lot. Not a lot. Maybe it's not the first thing I should be saying. But it's just the thing that nobody's talking about. They're talking about, it's like, can you believe that this team has been dominant for 3 years? Well, no, they weren't. The first, like,
what about the season before that? They were the number 1 in the league. Weren't they?
Right.
Weren't they the President's Trophy?
They were good. They were definitely good.
I'll have to look it up.
That was the year with Andrew Burnett, right?
I believe so. I believe so. I have to go back in time.
So, after that season, they made the big. Here's the thing. And I want to talk about taxes in a little bit because I'm kind of sick of this argument, but I just want to point out this is all Bill Zito and the staff that Bill Zito put in place. And Bill Zito is an agent who came into the league, looked at it like with no emotion. And I think that's the big difference between Tom Fitzgerald and Bill Zito. Is he goes into it like it's a business. He's not friends with these players. He's not friends with his coaches, right? Like all of the mistakes that Tom Fitzgerald has made is due to emotion and ego. And I don't want to speak for Tom to say ego, but on the surface, that's what it looks like. He didn't fire Lindy Ruff fast enough when the team was clearly not listening to him anymore. And that was because he just so badly wanted it to work out. Well, that's not how you can make decisions as GM in the league. Hold on. Let me get through a couple of these. He gave up an extra first-round pick in the Timo Meier deal. Well, the protected first-round pick. It ended up being a second-round pick because he didn't want to give up Alexander Holtz because that was his first draft pick with the Devils. Ended up losing more value on Holtz as the year. And it's possible that the Sharks didn't want him, but it appeared that he overvalued Holtz to try to keep him. And we all celebrated that part, that he didn't have to give up Holtz in that deal. But he ended up giving up Mukhamadullin. He gave up a first-round pick that turned into Musty, who looks like he's going to be a really good player. And then, they're giving up a second-round pick as well. Meanwhile, Bill Zito had a guy who scored 100 points, had Alan Walsh yelling at him because he traded Huberdeau. And he traded Huberdeau and Uyghur for Matthew Tkachuk. And I remember that this was a conversation, and I love to pat myself on the back, so I'm going to do it right here.
Go right ahead.
I thought there was better trades to be had. People were jumping for joy, like Calgary, like they did the impossible. They got these two assets that are fantastic. I like Uyghur. Huberdeau just felt like a product of the system. And I think he was 31 at the time. He had to get paid. Give him an 8-year deal, 7 or 8 year deal. I think Florida saw a poison pill, so I don't want to deal with that. And gave it to somebody else to swallow, right? And I think it was Brad Treliving, who's now the Maple Leafs or GM, who actually gave it to him. They gave him this crazy contract because they traded Matthew Tkachuk. And you kind of look at, but again, that took, you had to have no emotion in the deal to make that work. Tkachuk is clearly the better player of the two, even at the time. He's the best player in the deal. They made the big boy move. They gave him, I think it was an 8-year deal for $9 million per season. Fantastic deal. And now they got this star level player that they could build around forever. And that was on top of already having Barkov, who's a star level player. Now, I think you look at the formula that Florida is playing by, and I think the Devils can repeat it. You just have to have brass ones. You have to have, the guts of, you just have to go into it with all of the guts and taking the risks that make sense. Like the Sam Bennett deal, the Sam Reinhart deal, like both of those where you're trying to find distressed assets. You're looking at like the things like signing Dmitry Kulikov and signing Adrian Greer and signing players that you're like, I think that this could work in the right situation. Jesper Boquist, all these are former Devils, ironically, but trading for Seth Jones, right? You're trading away Spencer Knight. I don't remember if Bill Zito gave Sergei Bobrovsky that $10 million deal, but that was considered a psychotic move, and he turned Bobrovsky into a really good goalie, into a Hall of Famer. And it's making her decision, like they're going to probably let Ekblad go for nothing this offseason. And those are the types of things that hurt a team, right? They're the types of moves that you kind of look at, you're like, meh, we got nothing for them. But you got the Stanley Cup championship last year. You're in the Stanley Cup again this year. That is why Florida is where they are. Bill Zito has made a plethora of just stunning moves, and then when he loses a piece, he replaces it like systematically, and it's an assembly line of superstars. And I have no doubt that he's going to trade for J.J. Paterka and turn him to a star, or Trevor Zegras and turn him into a star. Finding these assets that are on cheap enough contracts that it's a risk, but it's a calculated risk and one that you can really – and then you bring them in there and you make them feel like they have a home. Like, you could be ruthless and still make them feel like they have a home. Look at Vegas. Vegas is ruthless, and all those guys love being there. And it has a lot more to do with camaraderie and the way that they've structured their system than it does about taxes, right? The taxes, I'm not going to say it means nothing, but to take away the value that Kelly McCrimmon and Bill Zito and Jim Nill have brought to these franchises by claiming taxes, it's all about having someone great at the top. And that's the difference. I think Tom Fitzgerald is a good GM. I don't know if a good GM could win a Stanley Cup. I think it has to be a great GM. The problem here, and you're seeing this ironically in basketball, I think Tom Thibodeau is a good coach, but good coaches don't. Well, Joe Mazzulla won, but usually good coaches don't win in the NBA when you don't have like a LeBron or a Tatum or something like that. So the Knicks are now, they've taken the risk, right? They've gone all in to take the risk. The problem is, what is the they have to hire the right coach, or they go the other way. And that's the same thing with the Devils. If the Devils say replace Fitzgerald with Brodeur, because I think Brodeur is the next coming of superstar god GM. Maybe he makes all the right moves. But it's just as likely that you go the other way and you're back into a rebuild and you wasted Jack Hughes' prime. So are you going to stick with the good GM knowing that he's always going to give you a chance to get into the playoffs? And then it's kind of like, we'll see what happens. Or are you going to let him go and hope that there's a great guy who's going to get you over the hump? And the decision has been made. Fitzgerald is staying. And I think it's the right move for now. But I look at the Eastern Conference. This is what really like put me there. The Metropolitan Division is terrible. It's awful. It's not good. I think the Devils could, if they make the right moves, they could dominate the Metropolitan Division. I think that Carolina has all this cap space. I think they're going to make a lot of moves. I think Tulsky is an interesting GM. I haven't really like figured out whether he's great yet. I think he's interesting. You know, he made the Mikko Rantanen move, turned him into Stankoven. I really like Stankoven as a prospect, but at the end of the day, he's just a second-round pick who's playing a little bit above what we expect him to be. And he went to Jim Nill, who was a great GM, and signed immediately a 8-year deal for $12 million. You know, the day of the trade. So again, you're looking at the difference between a good GM and a great GM. The Hurricanes have a good GM. Jim Nill's a great GM. And that's why Dallas is in the Western Conference Finals every year. That's why Pete DeVore's on the chopping block, even though they made a Final Four. That's why Jason Robertson's on the trade block, because they see what they have in this collection, and they say, we're close. Something's off. And if you had a great GM, Sam, there's a couple guys I'd wonder if they'd stick around. I think a guy like Jesper Bratt, I love Jesper Bratt, hasn't done a thing in the playoffs. And I think you might, as Tom Fitz, if you're Bill Zito and you can go and get a Matthew Tkachuk level player, like if you're Tom Fitzgerald, are you trading and you call, let's say you call Dallas, would you offer Jesper Bratt for Jason Robertson?
No.
Why?
Bratt has earned himself as part of the identity of the New Jersey Devils.
Right, that's emotional.
But
You're
this
a good
game is
GM.
but this game is emotional.
No, not for Bill Zito.
He has emotional guys doing the dirty work, and they do it every single time.
So do you think this is a Nico problem?
Possibly. I think Nico has made strides and progress towards where we want him to be. I just think a lot of times we're asking him to do too much because I'm not sure if he's that type of personality to be the one being that guy. I think Nico is comfortable, in his own skin when he does Nico things. I just think that what the Devils really need is someone that can elevate each individual player by their sheer presence in the room. It doesn't have to be a 50-50 player, but somebody that can light a fire under their asses and get the job done. There were times during the playoffs, Devils looked frustrated. There's a difference between the Panthers and the Devils when they get frustrated. Devils get frustrated, they get down on themselves very easily. They still try.
Season too, right?
Yeah, and they still try. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're mailing it in. They used to, but last season they didn't, and they made the playoffs as a reward. But I do think that what the Florida Panthers do in a situation if they were down 3-0, they have the players to change the narrative of the game. Like, as if that, okay, we're down 3-0. Let's turn the page. We're in chapter 3. There was an incident. Kachuk collided to this person. Pissed off the bench. Now you've thrown off their game. And suddenly there's one goal, and now you're down 3-1. And then 3-2. And the Panthers are coming back. We've seen it time and time again. They always do it. Remember that time when Nico accidentally fell into Barkov and they had to artificially infuriate themselves and went after Nico? They didn't win the game, but boy, did they get under Nico's skin, and they did mount a comeback in that game, if you remember that. Because I think the Devils were ahead quite a bit, and then they scored a couple goals, and it's just like, all right, that's what the Panthers do very well. So if McDavid and the Oilers are up 3-0 in the second period, if the Florida Panthers at any given moment, there's a momentum shift somewhere. They got players that make plays, and they got players that can change the outcome of the game just by doing all the little things right. I mean, that's the Florida Panthers right there. By the way, getting back to that stat, remember when I was raising my hand before that season, before they barely made the playoffs the previous season, they won 58 games that season, 122 points. So you can make an argument that the Astros...
They were missing.
What's that?
They were missing something, that team.
Yeah, Matthew Tkachuk. Because that team, had the Hubertos and all that. But
they didn't feel like a particularly hard team to play against, from what I remember.
Yeah.
They were just winning games. And if you remember, the bottom of the Atlantic Division was, from what I remember, I think it was terrible that year.
But can you believe right now, say if the Panthers win the Stanley Cup this year, that two Florida teams would have legitimate argument for being both dynasties from 2020 on, or maybe
so I covered that Lightning team, and they had a similar run, right? They had that 2019 year where they were the most dominant team in the league, barely ever lost, and then that was the year they lost in the first round to Columbus. So you get punched in the mouth, right? You get high in your own supply. You're you think that you're everything, right? And then you get punched in the mouth, which happened to the Panthers in 2022. And you know that you don't have the right formula to win in the playoffs. I don't see an example in a long time of a team that doesn't have that same story. Like, even Edmonton had to get punched in the mouth a couple times to they had that miraculous run in 2012, right? Where Larson and McDavid and all them got them to the Western Conference Final, and everybody was like, "Oh, great! Like, Edmonton's here." And they kind of never really put it all together again. But recently, they've been getting the Western Conference Final most years. They're in the final back-to-back years.
Well, they should be, because for years they were getting first overall picks. It was just...
None of them are that good on that team except for McDavid. Hall and Larson are both gone. What's his name? Yakupov was a nothing. He was
total bust.
Nugent Hopkins he's a fine player. It's not like, is he a top 30 player in the league? I don't think so. But they got McDavid, who's the number one player in the league, the best player in the league.
Which pisses me off because it was just so unfair at that time period.
He was the fourth one. Right. He was right. He was the fourth one. Or was Yakupov the fourth one? I think McDavid was the fourth one, but either way. Yeah, Edmonton's weird because Edmonton's made a lot of mistakes in their roster building. They paid Darnell Nurse like a top defenseman, and he's not. They gave decent money to Vander Kane, and it's not really working out. And Draisaitl was what, a third overall pick? I think we talked about this last week. So it's when you're constantly picking that high, and again, pot calling the kettle black. We're the Devils. We've had a lot of high picks too, but I think when you're looking at how they've built their team, it's nothing. I don't want the Devils to emulate that outside of building around your top two centers.
Well, the Devils have always emulated after the Pittsburgh Penguins. They followed that model to a T. They tanked.
Right. I don't know if you win that way anymore, though. It was only 7 years ago. I don't know if you win that way anymore, though. It was only 7 years ago.
And that's the problem. That's the big problem. But even those Pittsburgh Penguins teams, when they won they made it to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Red Wings. Sidney Crosby's first Cup Finals, they lost to the Red Wings. Eventually, they beat them. The next following year, they added that snarl to that team. I mean, that team had some beef to it. If you remember Brooks Orpik, I mean, that guy was nasty. They had some nastiness on
but
that.
The Devils added that this year.
Yeah, and they improved. The problem is they got hurt. That was a big issue in the second round. I'm sorry, in the first round. The first game they got hurt.
I agree in the playoffs. That's not the excuse in the second half of the season. There were serious roster flaws that when Jack Hughes was still here, and there was injuries here and there, like Siegenthaler got hurt, Markstrom got hurt. I think Hulla was dealing with something. I think Lazar was dealing with something. But the problem is that the Devils traded Curtis Lazar to be like a McLeod like fill-in, right? He's going to play wing, but if he needs to play center, then that's fine. When you lost McLeod due to getting arrested, you then just were like, okay, well, the guy we brought in to replace him is now just going to be the starter. It's like, no, you brought him in to be the fill-in. And then you had Hulla, who was also kind of this fill-in center guy. Sometimes he'd be on Jack Hughes' line, sometimes he'd be on the third line. You took away all of your center mobility, and you have none in the AHL. You have Ryan Schmeltzer, and the centers you have in the AHL aren't good. No offense to them. I'm sorry. They're not NHL players. So you had no depth at the position, and Hulla and Lazar fell off the map. And I do think they both got hurt, but that happens. And then that's why you're playing Justin Dowling for half the season. Justin Dowling played playoff games. And you're losing faceoffs left and right, which I think faceoffs are more important than people give them credit for. And you just don't have you have no depth at the position. And in 2023, you had 5 guys, 6 or 7. You had 6 or 7 guys who could play center. And then I love putting center on wing because I think they just play smarter. They know they know what position to be in. They understand to fill. That was the thing about the 2022-23 Devils that was so impressive, is how they filled space. And when you have a lot of centers on the ice, they're just intrinsically built to fill that space, while a winger is built to play at his position. And I think that I think that one of the things that the Devils really need to do is go after centers, and if they play on the wing, great. Like a Jared McCann, great. It would be a great addition to this team. Yanni Gord would have made a lot of sense. He just but I don't want to give him 6 years. That's the thing too. There's these free agent contracts that are being given out prior to free agency starting, to Yanni Gord and Brock Nelson. These centers are getting these psychotic deals that are, I've used this term already, but they're a poison pill. It reminds me of the Jeremy Lin deal when he got that $12 million third year, and the Knicks were like, I'm not giving him that. And they let him go to the Rockets. There's these aspects, giving 6 years to Yanni Gord is just to bring his AAV down now, but you're going to have to pay for that in 3 years. Maybe 2. Giving Brock Nelson 3 years at $7.5 million, the Devils couldn't do that. Brock Nelson doesn't make the Devils a Stanley Cup contender. So I don't see a reason. I couldn't even sit here and tell you that the Devils are a definite playoff team if all you did was add Brock Nelson to this team.
Oh, I would totally agree with it. To me, it's not the talent right now. I think a lot of it is the mindset and attitude of this team. Sometimes.
Yeah, but I like what Sheldon Keefe does with that. I like Sheldon Keefe's attitude. I do. I like the play style.
Yeah, but he's not on the ice, Nick.
So who's your ideal free agent? Do you want Sam Bennett? What are you looking for?
Sam Bennett is way too expensive. That's out of control spending. I don't know. I don't know the solution. I'm just saying that they don't have the right players at the moment. They've got a good core group. They just need to. It really all boils down to the bottom six. The bottom six is just, they brought in. Is it Brian Shaw? Is that his name? Is that his name, Nick?
I don't think it is, but now.
Now I gotta look it up because isn't he? I think Brian Shaw's a basketball player from the past. Help me out, guys. Help me out on the YouTube live. Brad Shaw. Yeah, they brought in Brad Shaw. For the defense essentially, but
yeah, replaces McGill.
Yeah. That I'm interested. I'm not worried about goaltending and defense right now, although I'm just maybe worried about the health of Dylan. But
Shaw is a great coach. I think he's a great assistant coach.
Yeah, but Ted says culture and organizational identity. It really is. I don't even know what the Devils' brand of hockey is right now. They market
because they basically put 4 brands and then put it in a mixer this year.
Yeah,
they tried to be too many things.
But if they played as one as a team, Stanley Cup winning teams of the past, they all may have great individual players, but when come playoff time, they came together as one, and could shut down any offense because they played collective team defense. They stepped it up. They're blocking shots. They're wearing out opponents. I mean, geez. I mean, one team that I thought that played really well during the playoffs, but then fell to the Oilers was the Dallas Stars. I mean, they were always playing on an edge. I mean, that first series against Colorado, they were down in Game 7, and then somebody decided to turn on the afterburners, and that was Rantanen, to prove a point. And that was probably one heck of a period.
Yeah.
Of hockey. There, Game 7s are fun, but the way Rantanen basically took over, he took it into another gear.
It was almost shell shocked by Colorado. They didn't know what to do. They just they got punched in the mouth.
Yep.
I'm trying to play out a scenario that fixes this.
I
think the first thing.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that without adding any players, I do think that Nico and Timo Meyer, their experience in the Worlds is going to help tremendously next season if they get in the playoffs. Because the way Timo Meyer was playing, I mean, he was playing with such focus, just watching a couple of the games, that I think Timo Meyer is going to be better next season. I think he's comfortable in New Jersey right now. I think he's adjusted, and I think he's going to improve on what he's done so far.
I'm gonna build off that because I like that. I think you need to make Timo Meyer a leader of this team. I think Timo Meyer's holding something back, and kind of trying to let Jack Hughes or Nico Hischier, whoever's on his line, cook. And when he was on that bum Panthers team, it was like, I guess I'll do it myself. He scored 40 goals. I know part of that was on the Devils, but he came to the Devils, who were a ready-made system, and he kind of was trying to find himself. And he found a role in the playoffs of being the instigator, and he dove into it, and he was really good at it. But he holds his stick too hard on offense. Clearly he's trying to be something he's not. He's not playing loose. Here's what I would do if I'm the Devils. First and foremost, I trade Andre Palat. He's not what you thought he was going to be. You thought he was going to come in and change the culture.
Not going to be easy.
It's going to be very easy. I'm telling you, it's going to be very easy. It's going to be very easy. I think you're going to get a second-round pick for him.
Wow.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a second-round pick for Andre Palat. I think you trade Andre Palat, and I think they eat the whole contract. I don't think whoever this team is not going to care. But you brought in Andre Palat because you thought he was going to bring that Stanley Cup experience. You thought he was going to bring that attitude. And you thought he was going to be the guy that pulled them out of the doldrums. But I'm telling you, something happened when he tore his groin in that I think it was November of that first year that he was here, where he lost some confidence, he lost some skill, and the collection doesn't work anymore. But he still fills a decent role. And with a rising cap, he's probably a $5 million player. With a rising cap. He's not that to the Devils, but he could be that to the Ducks. He could be that to the Red Wings. He could be that to the Canucks. He could be that to the Senators. I think there's a couple teams out there that would be willing to, similar to what the Devils did, where they didn't get Johnny Gaudreau, so they gave that money to Palat. I think you could see a team that strikes out on Marner or Bennett, who's like, okay, let me try to get a guy who brings that type of attitude. Palat's nowhere near as good as Marner, but I think you could get a guy who's trying to get the same bit of attitude, and you go after Palat. But you got to get him out. And no offense to the guy, I like him as a person on the team. He just didn't bring what I thought he was going to bring. So that opens up the A. The assistant, whatever. What is it? Associate. What is it? Assistant captain?
I always call it alternate captain. That's
alternate captain.
People call assistant. People call.
I think you're right. I think it's alternate. I think assistant's wrong, and I couldn't remember it. But the alternate captain. You put that A right on Timo Meyer. And if I'm Sheldon Keefe, I walk up to him and I was like, "You're a leader on this team. Act like it. Act like a leader. Tell people when they're not doing something right. Tell the other team to get off your star players. Drop kick a guy if you have to. And I think you got to give them a little credence to be you. Be kind, bring a little. They said they want to know D heads. I don't know how to say this, but they Tom Fitzgerald said the word last year. They don't want any of those on the team. I kind of want one. And I want Timo Meyer to be that guy. Give him the A. So that opens up $6 million. It also it gives facilities to Timo Meyer to be this dude. You're going to use that $6 million to get two players to fill the bottom six. I think you should go after Jared McCann. I think he's the type of player that's really going to fit this system really well. I think there's other players you can get. I think I talked about Zaka on a previous podcast. I'm a little bit off of that just because I'm trying to get a different type of attitude from our players. But I'm trying to think, like, because you're going to want to trade for these players. You're not going to want to sign them because I think free agency is going to be off its rocker this year. But I want McCann. You know, all the guys that really worked out got re-signed. Like Bjorkstan would have been great, but he re-signed. You know what would be interesting?
Who's that?
What do you think about bringing back Blake Coleman? He's
Again,
lost a step.
Again, I like Blake Coleman. It's just my thing is I don't like second tour duty with players.
Right. So you'd see the same thing about like Sharon Govich.
Uh,
He plays center.
I'm over him too. I'm over him too.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of team like the like it would be like I would say like go get Tavares, but Tavares is going to resign in Toronto.
I think Marchand is what they need on the bottom six.
I just don't think it's even in the realm of possibility.
Well,
I don't.
Yeah, I know, but that's what I think. Though they need that type of player.
I got you. Giroux would be an interesting one. I think Giroux would be a good player here. Giving him a year or two, bringing him back to I'm sure he still has a house in the Philly area. There's a couple guys I have to really, really dig into like who I want, but I just don't think you're gonna get those stars. I unless it's Quinn Hughes, but I think the stars, no pun intended, but like I would love Jason Robertson. I don't think they're gonna be the ones to do it, just because of the contract that's coming. Knowing you have to pay Luke, knowing you want to save money for Quinn. Giving 8 figures to a forward who's never played for you is a scary proposition. I know Mason Marchment is a guy people like. I'd be like, that's fine. But, I think that the Devils have a long off season. I think I want them to look at the Panthers and learn lessons from Bill Zito. I don't want them to learn lessons from the roster. Don't try to be the Panthers. Learn lessons about the moves that Bill Zito makes and why he makes them. Don't learn lessons like, I need to find my Sam Bennett. No, you need to find young players who are in situations where they're failing. I would look at Buffalo, just like Florida did, and say, Paterka, that's a guy who's not living up, but there's a reason for that. And Ottawa was smart to do that with Cousins, right? And a guy like Josh Norris would be interesting, but his contract is psychotic. You know what, Sam? There's a guy who I want. But it is the risk of the century. It is the type of move that will win you a cup or send you in the hole. Do you know who I want them to target?
Sidney Crosby?
Well, I think Sidney Crosby would be. I think he has 5 more years left in him of being really good. So I don't think there's any issue with Sidney. I would love Sidney Crosby. He's not going anywhere. No. I chew on this for a sec before you react. So I think your initial reaction is going to be negative, but hear me out. I want Mark Stone. He is the type of attitude that you want. He is the type of player that you want. He's everything you don't have on this roster. He immediately makes all 4 lines better because you're pushing everything down. He is, I think, when healthy, he's the perfect complement to Jack Hughes. When he's unhealthy, he's the perfect complement to Nico Hischier. So when he's playing hurt, I think he fits anywhere in this lineup. I think he's so valuable. Obviously, he can't stay healthy. And obviously, he's cost $9 million a year.
But he's LTIR friendly. Like he's helped
Yes.
The Vegas Golden Knights.
I just look at that player and again, it's a risk because are these injuries going to compound and take away some of his talent, but they haven't so far. When he plays in the playoffs, he's great.
Well, first off, is he going to be a free agent?
No, you'd have to trade for him.
Yeah.
And
So
he has no move.
yeah.
But
So number one, when I mentioned Marshawn, I mean that's more realistic than this scenario that you want. But I would agree. I would agree with you on many levels. I just don't know if you can actually pull him out of Vegas. I just think it's near impossible.
I think Vegas wants Marner. As much as they say they don't, I think Vegas wants Marner. I think if they get Marner, they trade Stone. If they tell Stone they don't want him anymore, he might waive his no-move clause. The problem there is that to get him to waive his no-move clause, he'd have to go to a place he wants to go. And he has no real ties to New Jersey. I'm looking it up to see if for any reason he'd have a tie to New Jersey. But played on the Brandon Wheat Kings. I don't think there's anybody on the Devils who played on the Wheat Kings. He's from Winnipeg, so I don't know if there's anybody on the team from Winnipeg. But again, 6'3", 210 pounds. He's still close to a point per game player. Hard-nosed and a leader. He's going to get the guys out of funks. But I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's a very unrealistic proposition that I'm putting forth.
But I like the point that you're trying to make. That type of player.
You got to go for it. And I don't know what it would cost. It might cost a lot, but it might not. Vegas is known for being we just don't want to pay him $9 million anymore. And you might get this is a bad example probably for other people, but you might see what the Predators sold Subban for because they wanted to get out of his $9 million deal. Speaking of Subban, can we just talk about how crazy it is that Steve Santini is still signing NHL contracts?
Wow, I haven't heard that name in years.
He signed a 2-year deal with the Lightning.
Wow.
I was floored. He was on. I wrote a list this year. 5 guys you had no idea are still playing NHL games. And Steve Santini is playing NHL games. It's crazy.
He kind of reminds me. It kind of reminds me of that obscure backup quarterback in the NFL that just hangs around and collects checks and doesn't even really get noticed, but is still hanging around and collecting checks.
Yeah, like Case Keenum.
Yes.
Yeah. But the difference is he's more remember what John David Booty kept getting checks? Never played a game? That's Santini.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
or was there a guy named last name wasn't there a Barkley from USC, the quarterback?
Oh, Matt Barkley.
Yeah, didn't he collect a lot of checks?
He did. And that was a crazy thing. He was supposed to be a guy that was at the top of the draft, and he decided to come back for one more year. His coaches talked him into it, and he tanked it. Fell to the 6th round, and he never became anything. It was crazy. That story's crazy.
Now, he didn't play much. He didn't hardly play it at all. But if you remember, it was his name Davis Webb. He was on the Giants, but he worked his butt off in practice. He was like the Rudy, first in, last out, but never played, but did all the dirty work in practice and scouting teams and just to wait for his chance, and finally got it with Buffalo, to live out that dream. So,
yeah. Listen, Jared Lorenzen made it all the way to the NFL.
Oh,
the hefty
lefty. Yeah.
Rest in peace. There's a lot of great stories of these small guys, but that's not what I want for the Devils. I want you to go all. I want you to make the move. I want you to just shock the world. I think because here's the thing. I know the Hurricanes are going to do it. The Hurricanes are going to improve their roster. I know the Rangers are going to do everything in their power to make that team better.
Absolutely.
I know the Islanders want to push for it. They're not sitting back. I know the Penguins are going to do some interesting things. I think that they just don't want to they're going to go for it one more time. They're going to try to reset on the Carlson thing, make him go away. and try to make a run with this team one more time. Washington's in talks with to get Marco Rossi from Minnesota. They're not resting on their laurels after a playoff disappointment. Montreal is going to go after it if you want to talk about teams on the fringes in the Atlantic. Ottawa is not satisfied with their playoff appearance. They're going to go for it. But I don't think Boston might be the surprise. Boston might just do the rebuild. Say, eh. And if that's the case, then if Pasternak becomes available, that's a player you trade Bratt for.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to trade Bratt. But for David Pasternak, even with that salary, I'd make it work. Anyway. I'm ready for plugs.
Just plug away.
Pucks and pitchworks.com. We have so much, Sam. We just put up a new story about Tom Fitzgerald's comments on Jake Allen. So go to pucksandpitchworks.com to see what Tom Fitzgerald just said about Jake Allen. He made comments about Luke Hughes. We're going to be writing about that as well. I talked about Brock Nelson earlier today. Last night, I heard an interesting story. What would it look like? What 3 signings would the Devils make if they just didn't care about the future and they went all in on 2023? What 3 signings could make it look like basically yelling Leroy Jenkins and going to fight the monsters? Like, what does that look like? So 3 signings there. That's on Pucks and Pitchworks right now. And I have so much free agency articles coming up, draft articles coming up, trade articles coming up. And we're going to be reacting. The Combine's coming up this week. You're going to hear so many rumors, and we're going to react to them. I'm not above reacting to rumors. I never have been, and I never will be. I love talking about this stuff. I love.
You're a gossiper. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, when it's not, when you sign up to be a hockey player, trade rumors are a part of the deal. That's kind of like the lowest of hanging fruit that I'll do. Those are the conversations that I'll get into. But I'm also going to write about tonight, the Devils broke a record for Devils Youth Foundation donations. So we're going to write about that.
Wow. Pucksandpitchforks.com. Already. I have nothing to plug, really, other than I'm watching the Stanley Cup Finals right after this podcast.
Are you going to tweet about it?
Me? I might. I've been quiet on Twitter lately.
Do some live tweeting.
All right.
Say some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Sam Bennett, $11 million.
Yeah. Or
the Sam Bennett's worth $5 million.
Maybe I should start trolling. Sometimes that works.
Gets people going.
Yeah. All right. I want to thank all those tuning in. Dropping the podcast at midnight. Till next time, let's go Devils.